Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Exploring DC, where we take a piece of DC and explore it with you. I am your host, Josh. With me is my co-host today, Jalen. How are you?
Hello, I am doing really good. I am very excited to talk about this movie. I literally
Yeah,
just finished it right before recording, maybe 30 minutes ago now. So I am like super excited to dive into this movie with you, Josh.
yeah. So we announced a couple weeks ago on Superman Day that we're doing a Summer of Superman series of sorts, and the main portion
Mhm.
of that is watching through all the Superman movies. So we're gonna go through the Reeve movies, the one Brandon Routh movie, and then the Snyder movies, which again we've said will not be controversial at all of what our opinions
No, they
are.
won't.
So this is a big kickoff, man. This is like the one, the
Definitely.
or OG. Like when people think of Superman on film, I don't outside of maybe Man of Steel, they think of this one.
Definitely, for sure. I
Yeah.
know when because I was actually, fun fact, introduced to the Superman media through Man of Steel. For the
Hmm.
longest time, for me, Cavill was my Superman. So it's like when I watched this film around 13, 14 years old, I wasn't as interested in it at first, and I was like, man, Cavill is so much better. As I'm
Yeah.
older, as I'm older, and as I'm more of like a film buff, as I'm starting to make my own films, just look at film and look at art differently, right? I'm
Right.
looking at even like just watching this movie now, I was like, dude, he is literally perfect as
Yeah. That's what I
Superman.
was gonna ask of like your prior history with this one because it is such like a big piece of DC. Because you grew up with we talked about Batman 1989, and you grew up
Hmm.
with that one, but Superman 78 was something you kind of came to later, at least a little
Yeah,
bit later.
yeah, because I was always like the disc collector. Like I would always go to Walmart with my mom and I would look for any sort of DC superhero DVD set that they had. And at the time, they
Yeah.
only had Superman Returns, they had Man of Steel, and they had Batman the box set. Where it's like
With the
Batman
four movies.
1998. Yeah, with
Mm-hmm.
the four movies, exactly.
I know. Yep.
Yeah, like literally, that's the like as I'm talking about it, the nostalgia is running.
Yeah.
But even, going later on, I saw the Superman box set of the original Richard Donner,
Mm-hmm.
all four of those movies. And then I got it. Like I said, I watched the first one, but like I said, little 13, 14-year-old me was not interested in like the older style, especially because I was so used to like how Zack Snyder does his action and how he does his flying and just everything in the modern sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like watching this one, it definitely took some getting used to for younger me, but watching it now, watching it as I'm older, it is, and I actually texted one of my friends before the podcast. He asked me how the movie was, and I was like, this might be one of my favorite movies of all time,
There you go. That's
for
good.
sure.
That's good to
Yeah.
hear. Yeah, I was like trying to think of my prior experience with it because I feel like it's always been around, but I haven't fully engaged with it.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and especially as a kid, I like had seen bits and pieces, but I had no interest in comparison to some of the other DC stuff. And I think that is because it is somewhat dated and of its time, but that's like the charm of it now. But
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like I hadn't fully watched it, and then watching it this time, there's a lot that I like. I didn't even fully remember Lex Luthor's whole scheme and how ridiculous it kind of is. I just remember like the
Yeah.
moments of Superman and Lois, and like actually getting into the plot and everything. I'm like, okay, this is a lot more interesting than I remember. But yeah, let's get into a few superlatives here. Directed by Richard Donner, who's done a bunch of stuff. He's done The Goonies, he did The Omen, he did the Lethal Weapon franchise, and he of course did Superman 2 originally, but he made like we'll get into that in our Superman 2 episode, but he had a whole thing where he filmed 75% and they kicked him off because they filmed these movies at the same time, Superman, Superman 2.
See, I didn't know that.
But
That's interesting.
yeah, so there's context for that. So it how did you feel like do you have experience of Richard Donner, any of his stuff? Because I know Goonies is big and I know Lethal Weapon has been big.
In Fun fact, I've never seen Goonies. The people in the comments are gonna kill me.
Yeah.
I have
No, it's
never,
okay. I haven't
ever
either.
seen. Okay, look, twinsies.
Yeah.
I've never seen Goonies, and
Yeah.
but I do know the Omen franchise. In preparation
Hmm.
for watching the first Omen that came out last year, I believe,
Yeah.
2024. Um, I found out that Richard Donner did direct the first one, so I watched it. amazing, and
There you go.
that is the extent of my Richard Donner knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm not really, I haven't seen Lethal Weapon. I haven't seen a bunch of the more popular Richard Donner stuff, aside from Superman, of course.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah. I'm gonna hit you with some other directors that they considered. Just four that were interesting to me. One was Francis
Mm.
Ford Coppola, who did the Godfather movies. Would have been right. Would have been a
What?
fascinating, different movie. Another one which seems similar, I guess, maybe based on the Omen poll, is William Friedkin, who did The Exorcist. Just another big
Yeah,
70s filmmaker. Would have been really cool.
really?
Yeah. And then they also had discussions with both Lucas and Spielberg. Spielberg makes a lot of sense with Williams and just how big he was at the
Yeah,
time. But Lucas is like, that was him just getting started kind of around that
yeah,
era. So I'm surprised they even talked to him about anything related to
yeah.
Superman.
Like what's interesting about about the list of directors, is that they got Richard Donner, who I believe had done The Omen already up until this point.
Yeah.
They also got if they were also considering the Exorcist director, which is kind of like The Omen in a
Hmm.
sense. I wonder, was there something, just like thinking with my film brain now, I wonder if there's something that they liked in these demonic films, if they liked the way that something was directed or the way that something was shot,
Yeah.
where they were like, this right here would go really well with Superman. And it's like, which is interesting to me, just because it's like, on one hand, exorcisms and demons and stuff have nothing to do with Superman or bringing Superman to life on screen. So I do wonder if that was just purely coincidental, if they were just two directors who they were like, you know what,
Right.
you, based off your filmography, you could kill this, or if it was a thing too of like, maybe they saw something in The Exorcist or they saw something in The Omen that made them truly sit back and be like, okay, I like how he shot this, or I like how he, I like how he encapsulated this level of the story or whatever that would go well with
Right.
Superman. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely interesting.
That's a very interesting take. My take is a lot more boring, and I think they just picked like the hottest 70s directors and were like, do you want to do Superman? And
It could also be
Donner was
that
the only
too.
one that said yeah. But
It could also be
could
that.
have been. The other interesting thing, I mean, I mentioned Coppola, but this was written by mainly Mario Puzo, who did the Godfather trilogy. Like he wrote the book and then helped with the screenplays for those movies.
That's why this movie's so fucking amazing.
There
There
you
you go.
go. And then they
Problem
also had
solved.
a couple other writers, Robert Benton and then David and Leslie Newman. And then lastly, score. Unfortunately, Jackson Wells isn't here to talk about score because I know he's our score guy. But
He's here in
John
spirit.
Williams, I mean, John Williams is like the guy, of course, but
Yeah.
this might be like obviously like one of his top tier stuff. It's iconic for a reason. Like they still use it. They used it in the new Superman trailer. Like
Yeah.
it's
Like that is
it's
how
still present.
iconic it is, bro. And it's like, even during like the opening like title cards, like
Hmm.
the credits and stuff, like just hearing that, like it will give you chills,
Yeah. It's like
you
this
know?
it's the level of like the Star Wars theme of how
Exactly.
iconic it is to the franchise. And
Mhm.
honestly, I would say like we talked about Tim Burton and Danny Elfman's theme for Batman. I think this surpasses it in terms of like iconography and maybe even quality. Even though I love that Tim Burton theme, because
Interesting.
this is so tied to the character that I think it's like up there as one of our
Yeah.
best DC pieces of music.
Yeah, for sure. So like that's something interesting that let me ask you to go a little deeper on that. Like, why do
Yeah.
you feel like this is more like, not interesting? Why? Let me like, tell me why this is more iconic to you than the
Because I think of
Danny Elfman one.
Batman and I can go to the Zimmer stuff with Nolan and I can go to the Giacchino with the
Okay.
Batman and I can pull
Yeah.
from all these different eras of Batman. I feel
Mm.
like with Superman, especially with less of a film history, like you think of his music, you only think of John Williams. Maybe you think of obviously you think of the modern Zimmer score for Man of Steel,
Right.
but you're not thinking of anything else. And
That's true.
mainly that's
Very
because
true.
Christopher Reeve is most of the Superman movies, but like at the same time, it is so intrinsically tied to the character that they're still marketing with it to this day.
Yeah, I mean, even they put it in Lego. They put it in all the Lego games that
I think
Superman is
so.
a part
Right.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just been around. Cast Christopher Reeve as Superman. This is his
Beautiful.
main body of work.
Mhm.
We had an extensive discussion, me and Jackson did, about Christopher Reeve when we watched his documentary. Um, and we'll get into him in a second. But yeah, just an icon for the character.
Yeah,
Margot Kidder's Lois Lane, again, another like
amazing.
just so good. A couple big actors. They had Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, who recently had won an Oscar before he got signed on, so he was very high in demand, and he recently just passed away. We talked
Yeah.
about it a couple weeks ago. And then Marlon Brando as Jor-El, which is so funny to me because the whole situation of Marlon Brando, again, another Godfather tie,
Hmm.
is that he got paid a ridiculous amount of money. I think it was the highest paid actor because he was getting box office profits, and I believe a salary of about 13 million at the time, which
Wait,
is
he was getting box office profits of
yeah,
this movie, and he was barely
yes,
in it. What?
right.
That's
Marlon Brando
crazy.
was like, and then even when you look at the poster, right, like you see Christopher Reeve, but Marlon Brando's
Yeah.
big head is right there with him because I think he was like close to top billed in some situations too. Like it was him and Christopher Reeve. Yeah,
That's
fascinating.
wild.
And also with Marlon Brando too, like he did not learn any of his lines, which was they used cue cards on set and he just read them off, and he only had 12 days to shoot. So he was
What?
like the diva. Like this is publicly known that Marlon Brando was like not fun to work with on this one. Like he didn't come back for Superman 2. It's such a fascinating case of like an actor that was huge at the time, like thinking he's too good for
Yeah.
something comic booky, you know?
Yeah, I mean, even like that's crazy how like stuff like this kind of happened around that time, where it's like you would have big divas on set who would make,
Right.
shooting a living hell. And trust me, like I said, like I've me and Jackson have both worked on film sets and like have
Mm-hmm.
worked with in situations that aren't necessarily ideal, the most ideal. So it's like I can only imagine having to deal with that on a bigger stage, something that involves more work with the VFX and all of that, right? But it is crazy how you saw this with this, you saw this with Back to the Future Part One with Eric Stoltz, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
also it is miraculous that both of those directors, that Spielberg and that Donner, made you know both made works of art that like cements themselves just in
Yeah.
history. You know what I mean? In like comic book movie history and geekdom and all this other range. That is interesting though.
And
Because
I
like
will,
even like
yeah,
even like watching it, I didn't necessarily know that it was Marlon
right.
Brando, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
I'll say even for like something that is incredibly phoned in, and I knew ahead of time that it was phoned in, so I kind of noticed. Not a terrible performance. Like it still works for
no,
what it is,
it
and I
is,
was
yeah.
down for it. Except he refused to say Krypton the right way, so he says Krypton, and it is so ridiculous that he just won't. Okay, it's just classic Marlon Brando stuff. The other thing I found out trivia wise, dude, is that he came up with the idea for Jor-El to have the same S crest on his chest that Superman does, which I didn't realize that wasn't a
Really?
comics thing. So I'll have to look into it more. But yeah, that's for at least this film, he came up with that idea to put Jor-El's crest, and obviously now that's like an iconic part of his costume across medium. So
Yeah, yeah, that
and then
is
a couple other
wild.
ones. Yeah. Ned Beatty as Otis Graves, Jackie Cooper as Perry White, and then I just threw in Terrence Stamp as Zod because he's going to be a big part of the next one. So
Mhm.
I was wondering, I kind of forgot that they filmed them back to back. So I was like, dang, they already got Terrence Stamp as Zod, like this big actor, just for this small bit part. But now that I know they filmed it back to back, it makes sense why he was still in this one, despite only being in like two
Yeah,
minutes.
that is one question that I wanted to ask you before you had mentioned that it was filmed
Mm-hmm.
back to back. Is how did that work? Because I mean, or like why would they even include Zod in this, especially because it was
Right.
such a short opening. Granted
Yeah.
it was cool. I can't lie. Like even like looking at this film structurally, like from the jump, I'm gonna be honest. I think I was more invested in this 20 minutes spent on Krypton than I was in Man of Steel. I'm gonna be completely honest,
It was
because
good. It
yeah,
was, yeah.
because we spent about the same time there. Literally the exact same thing happens. They put Zod away, then Krypton goes to shit, right? But it's like looking at this, just this world. Now I don't know if that's Marlon Brando. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's like the gravitas that he brings as an actor. but it's like even like the environment, it felt more alien. It felt more immersive, which is
Hmm.
weird, right? Because Man of Steel, they had that whole opening Krypton battle, and I was like, even like watching that now, that is, I think, my least favorite part of Man of Steel. Meanwhile, this is one of my favorite parts of this movie. It's wild.
Right.
It is a
I
crazy thing.
I was pretty sucked in the beginning, and
Yeah.
it's cool. I think there's a part of it that I think older film has a way of being a little like spooky. I don't like ominous, but
Yeah.
also like the way they put the council as these like big shadowless faces on in front of Zod and stuff, and then even like how Zod and them get trapped in the triangle, as ridiculous as it could be.
Yeah.
There's still like a nature of it, and the impending doom of Krypton, where like it captures the vibe of like this society falling apart, and it's something that you can feel like the 70s film influence more so. Like
Yeah.
it's not something they could capture the same way today of how
Yeah.
it's formatted, you know what I mean?
Especially like because for some reason every film back then used fog like so
Right,
fucking
yeah.
heavily. So it's like literally during every scene on Krypton is dark, it's foggy, but it's also really neon. There's like a blue tone
Yeah.
to it that just plays into it even more. And even like the destruction of Krypton. I mean, I have a question for you now. Like, how do you feel like the destruction of Krypton was, I guess, portrayed in this? Because it is portrayed differently in each time we see the Superman
Hmm.
origin story. So for this one, since it is older, since it is a little bit more practical in a sense with some special effects added, how did that go? How did that move you in a way? Like, how did that make you feel?
I enjoyed it. I think it was again pretty ominous, and like I
Yeah,
just liked the aesthetic. I loved how crystallized everything was, and
exactly. Yeah,
again it just captures like the era really well, where I'm like, yeah, you can tell a lot of
for
the
sure.
like influences of practical stuff that they would do to make this work. And
For
it's just
sure.
very it grabs your attention in a way that like if you just started with Superman crash landing on Earth, I don't think you would have got the same level of interest because it's just so fascinatingly weird and off kilt and different
Hmm.
than the rest of the movie. Where the rest of the movie is very straightforward, I would say.
Yeah, I would for sure agree with that. Even like their little aluminum foil suits turning red,
Yep.
like
Mm-hmm.
as the world is literally going to shit.
So cool.
Right? It was so fucking cool.
Yeah. But then we get Superman sent. He gets floated out of the planet pretty much
Hmm.
and sent to Earth. Also, the thing I noticed immediately is that he's not like a full baby when he lands. He's like a toddler, which I don't think happens a ton in Superman media,
It
as far as I know.
doesn't. Yeah, no, it doesn't. Which is another thing that I found interesting too, is like
Right.
I when he lifts when he lifts the tractor and saves Mom and Pa Kent, it's like I was like, wasn't this dude just a baby like a little bit ago?
Yeah.
But I guess he was he has been floating through space for a few years up until that point, right?
Yeah.
So
Another
yeah.
funny thing I noticed in that original scene is that Martha calls Jonathan Pa like one time, and then neither her or Clark ever call him like Pa again. Like that's not like a thing they use. And so I was just like, why did you? Yeah, I don't know. It was very funny. But yeah, they adopt Clark, and then we cut to a lot of the stuff of him in high school and getting into like Jonathan's heart attack and stuff like that. An interesting thing, like I don't know how you felt about the teenage actor, but he had 3 to 4 hours of prosthetics to look more like Christopher Reeve. And so that was interesting because I felt there was a resemblance, but I just thought they casted someone that looked really similar.
Yeah. Because like they don't really do that type of shit today. Like they just kind of find
Yeah.
someone who looks very similar and is like, you know what, there, go ahead. You're the
Well,
same
and not
person.
only that, but his lines were also dubbed over by Christopher Reeve to get like film continuity.
All of them or some of them were
Yeah.
kept.
You don't hear the actors Jeff East, you
What?
don't hear his voice in the movie.
That no, I'm
Yeah.
gonna be real, bro. That genuinely was like this because you couldn't tell. You know what I mean?
It's
I felt
a
like
seamless transition. It's really nice.
yeah, it is, and I felt like I could tell the ADR more with Christopher Reeve. You
Yeah.
know, like this is a whole like in certain scenes where he and Lois are talking, I'm like, oh, that's clearly ADR. But it's like a nostalgic type of bad ADR. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But it's like even like with the young actor. the fact that each line I thought genuinely was this younger actor, and I was like, man, he looks a lot like Christopher Reeve, he sounds a lot like Christopher Reeve. For a second, I didn't think they were like, I thought they weren't two separate people. Like for a quick second, I was taken
Yeah.
aback a little bit because I was like, did they like somehow find a way to fucking digitally de-age Christopher Reeve in this
It's
in '78? But
yeah.
crazy, man. That is
Again, it's
wild,
just
bro.
like you could tell there's so many like creative ideas that they put into this one that even though it is dated
Yeah,
and of its time, it's like, so fascinating what they were able to achieve in 78 because no superhero movie was done on this scale before. Like this was the OG superhero movie.
yeah, for
And
sure.
it's just so cool to see like all that the origins of what we see so much now where we're getting, you know, 5, 6 comic book movies a year. There was just
Hmm.
no precedent for something like this to this scale. And I
Yeah.
think they like pulled off so much.
No, they definitely did. And it's like even thinking about how you truly do not see Superman until maybe an hour and some change
Mm-hmm.
in. You spend so much, one, you spend about 25 minutes on Krypton, then you spend about 45, with young Clark,
Mm-hmm.
and then you kind of get maybe 10 to 15 minutes of just normal Christopher Reeve moving and moving around in Metropolis. But it's like
Yeah.
you look at that and then Superman appears when he saves Lois from the helicopter. But even like just in that sense, it's like the pacing, it feels so smooth. It feels so much
Yeah.
better than some superhero films today, like Captain America and all I mean, even some DC movies like Birds of Prey in some cases and Lost Kingdom and The Flash especially. It's like you look at these things and it's like for this to be the first and one of the biggest comic book films that started kind of a new golden age of comic book movies. In a sense, it was done, man, seamlessly. Which
Seamlessly.
which even that, like, let me ask you, like, how did you know, what's your take on that? Like, what was that? Because this is like truly an origin story. Like, it takes its time,
Mm-hmm.
with
Yeah.
getting you to that point where he is Superman. So like, how did that feel for you spending so much time with him, or with Krypton, and then spending so much time with him in his teenage years, and then even like that little bit before he fully turns into Superman? Like, how was that for you?
I think that's why I like am so much more I was so much more focused on the first half of this movie.
Hmm.
I hinted at it. I did not find the Lex Luthor scheme interesting of
Me
him
neither.
like trying to use these missiles to take over California. Did not
Hmm.
really work for me, even though I love Gene Hackman. He's a great actor.
Yeah.
Uh yeah, all the simple stuff is what I love. I love when Superman is just like about his relationships and about him finding his purpose. Again, that's part of why I'm drawn to Man of Steel too, though for different reasons tonally. But this
Interesting.
movie like it captures his origins really well and it if I'm someone that doesn't know what Superman is, like it's easy to get into it. Like it's
Yeah.
they they take their time with it and by the time he is Superman, you're like fully on board. And I think that's a good transition to like we get the scene where he finds Jor-El's like hint and he goes to the fortress and Jor-El trains him for 12 years. Time jump. Christopher Reeve walks out. I want to get into Christopher Reeve because I just think like
Perfect.
I, I talked about him a lot about in the documentary. There's just something about him as a person and as an actor. There's a screen presence and just the presence of him that is like so endearing and so heartfelt that I'm like glued whenever he's on screen.
Yeah, it's so interesting, which I'm actually happy that we are like going fully in depth on his performance because I'm so interested to see how James Gunn and David Cornsweet are going to play off of this performance
Yeah.
in the new Superman movie. But even just talking about Christopher Reeve, there is definitely something about him in this movie that has so much, you know, it just pulls you in and it like keeps you there. You know what I mean? Even like his little moments where he's first introduced, where he's stuttering and he's like, bumbling all over the place, and he's like, "Oh my God,
Hmm.
I'm so sorry, Lois." And he like you truly feel like there is no way this dude can be Superman, and then he pops out on the scene as Superman and saves Lois, And it's like it feels so surreal. Like I'm even getting chills right now just talking about it,
Yeah.
man. It's like, the moment where he saves Lois and the score kicks in and it just takes over and you see, like you just see the swagger that he has and like the charming confidence, but at the same point, at the same time, it feels like this man could not hurt a fly. And that's
Yeah.
all to like Christopher Reeve and how he plays Superman. He is like, I feel like the same way that people talk about, Robert Downey Jr. and everyone's Batman is different, but Robert Downey Jr. and Hugh Jackman and all these
Hmm.
characters in these iconic roles, I feel like Christopher Reeve should be at the same level or above them because he kind of started it. Like he is Superman,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
people so often overlook like how much he brought to this whole thing. It sets the standard for like the tone I love about Superman, where it is just like he is a friend and a helper and that figure to people, where he's not using his power to like be better or like control
Mm.
anything. He's just using it purely out of like the goodness of his heart to help people. And Reeve captures that so well. There's a
Yeah.
moment I love too. Like you talked about Clark Kent, how well he plays like the bumbling thing, where it is
Yeah.
fun. It's goofy, but it's not like over the top where it's too
Hmm.
much. And he writes the line so well. But there's a scene I believe James Gunn talked about it in a YouTube video is what I remember it from. But I had noticed it when I was watching it. There's a scene where he's with Lois right in the room, and he wants to reveal that he's Superman, but then he kind of
Hmm.
sinks back in. But he is in his Clark Kent persona, and then he takes off his glasses, and you can see his posture just completely change to match Superman,
Yeah.
and his shoulders raise up, and it's the coolest effect like ever. And it's just him
Yeah.
acting physically and embodying like how his Superman posture and everything is so much different than Clark Kent. And I think that's where I'm
Exactly.
fascinated to see if that feeds into the new movie, because that's where you see how people could not understand Clark Kent as Superman, because the
Yeah.
whole thing is that people are like, the glasses disguise is stupid, right? It's the same person, same face. But when
Mhm.
he's portraying himself and his persona on that different level, like yeah, people would not notice because they're
Yeah,
just not
exactly.
similar people.
Exactly. And that's kind of like what um even regardless, we have had some great Superman. I mean, I don't think we've had a terrible Superman, like just character. I don't think we've had
Hmm.
a terrible actor who has played Superman or a Superman
I agree.
portrayal, right? But I think that none of them have completely differentiated that Clark Kent and that Superman persona. Even like Tyler Hoechlin, who is my favorite modern day Superman,
Yeah.
even that Clark Kent is more seasoned. Like I said, he has children, he has a wife, he has a whole
Yeah.
life to protect, right? He's been through the ringer for 10 plus years as Superman. There isn't
Hmm.
really a difference there when he's Clark Kent and when
No,
he's
there's not.
Superman. For Cavill, there really isn't a difference. You
Yeah,
know what I
same
mean?
guy.
Yeah, for Brandon Routh, maybe a little bit, but that was because he was trying to emulate Christopher Reeve's performance,
Right.
because that is technically a continuation of this world. But even like looking at this man, like kind of like you said, like when he's like having that inner turmoil as an actor, like looking at that in his body movements, in the way that he kind of shrinks up, and then when he takes the glass off and fixes his posture to kind of like tell her,
Hmm.
like just in that you kind of feel that shift, and that is an important aspect to Superman that truly makes, kind of like you said, like it truly makes you understand, man, that this isn't, you know, this can't be, the same guy. And it's like even like you look at, and the montage when he first appears and he's like going around and he's literally saving a cat out of a tree and he's
Hmm.
stopping all these robbers, and you just have people looking up in the sky, not in fear but in wonder, and in like this is so crazy to even
Yeah.
believe. It brought tears to my eyes, man, because like even looking at, you know thinking about how the James Gunn Superman trailer made you feel, just that whole concept of just look up, and
Yeah.
this is the embodiment of a good man. This is the embodiment of a good person. He doesn't lie. He doesn't cheat. He doesn't steal. But he is the embodiment of what humans strive to be. And yet,
Hmm.
he wants nothing more than to understand humans and to be a human. There's something special about Superman, and there's something special just about that character, which is why I love him and why I've connected with him and why I think so many people can connect with him. But that's something that I feel like Christopher Reeve brings, that I don't know if any other actor truly brings is that understanding of
Hmm.
you guys are looking up to me, and yet I'm only wanting to be like you, you know? And I think
Yeah.
that's such a beautiful part of Superman's character as a whole, you know?
Yeah, it's just a perfect blend of like joy and hopefulness and peace and everything that you want from Superman
Yeah.
that that makes it stand out. That people will say he's a boring character, but this is like the proof that it's not. This is the proof that it's like something more and can mean something. And it's just so I it's even more tragic with like Reeves' career getting cut short and the way things
Mhm.
went. Because I just think he was such a powerful presence, and I would have loved to see like 50 more movies with him.
Oh, dude, me
And
too.
you
Me
know,
too. He deserves like his multiverse moment, man, where like he
I
comes back
know,
and the crowd gets up and cheers and
right,
he has it, but unfortunately he had the accident. But like I said,
right,
even the actor, like it isn't just a character, that
yeah.
he's playing. It feels like Christopher Reeve actually tried to live his life that way.
He just is
Like just
Superman. Like it's just
yeah,
there.
literally,
Yeah,
like he is Superman. Like just be a good person. And I think
yeah.
that's a lesson that so many of us and just so many people
Mm.
in general could just take is that if we all just go outside and each day strive to just be a good freaking person, so many issues would be solved. You
We
know what I
just
mean?
it'd be a happier place, man.
It would be a happier place. So yeah.
I'll be fascinated to see like we can re-examine him in these other movies because especially as we get into like Superman 3 and Superman 4, which are not as
Hmm.
well liked, we'll have to see how he adapts to those situations because those are different directors, different writers, all that stuff. Another
Yeah.
thing though, the best moments for me all were like his relationship with Lois Lane, and again,
Hmm.
that's Margot Kidder who just comes in and is like electric. I think most
Yeah.
Lois Lane actresses are interesting outside of maybe Amy Adams, but we can get into that later. But
Hmm.
I think Margot Kidder, like again, as Reeve set the standard, like she set the standard for Lois, and you see it echo in a lot of the like modern adaptations, especially with like maybe Superman and Lois. It's very tonally similar.
Yeah. Kind of like playing Clark Kent and playing Superman as like two different halves. I think that any actor or any actress that is going into Lois, more specifically a Lois that doesn't know, playing a Lois that doesn't know that Clark Kent
Mm-hmm.
and Superman are the same person is different from playing a Lois that knows. You know what I'm saying?
Yep,
There really is
completely.
no there is no difference in emotion. There is no difference in view. Like it genuinely feels like she can't stand Clark Kent at times, but
Yeah,
at the same
which
time have
I
so much
mean,
love and admiration and
yeah,
all this other stuff for Superman, right? And even like I said, like kind of like how we keep harkening back, that speaks to the power of, you know, Lois's actress, and that speaks to the power of Christopher Reeve, is that you can play two kind of separate people in a sense, or two separate, or portray two separate different beings or emotions or whatever in a way that feels so seamless and in a way that feels like they couldn't be farther apart on a bar. You know what I mean? How
right.
Lois is with Clark is so different from how Lois is with Superman. And sure,
With
that can be a
Superman.
testament to the writing as well, right? Is that the writing can put them in these situations to truly test them as actors. But that also goes to the performance, because trust me, bro, with the with the shitty performance, it would not have came off
Right.
as well as it did.
Yeah.
And like I said, that chemistry is like it's off the charts.
It's so good. Those
Yeah.
were the moments that like again, I just love the small character moments with Superman whenever we get them, and I think that's what
Yeah.
this movie excelled in much more than like the overall story, which let me
Yeah.
get into that a bit. So the whole thing is if I remember correctly, Lex Luthor comes in and he has this whole plan. He finds out about these missiles and he
Mhm.
wants to hijack them to disrupt stuff in California and take over. It's a very like golden age Lex Luthor scheme. You have
Yeah.
Gene Hackman here, who is a very over the top actor and had did a whole bunch of things. He also was like very diva-ish, like Marlon Brando. He did not want to shave his mustache or cut his
Really.
hair. He got away with the hair, but they ended up tricking him into shaving his mustache by like telling him that Richard Donner would also shave his mustache. But Richard Donner was wearing
That's
dude,
awesome.
no shit. Richard Donner was wearing a fake mustache the whole time just
What?
to get him to do it. Yeah.
Yo, that is insane.
It's awesome, and I think he's really fun. Not exactly my type of Lex Luthor, you know.
Same. I would agree. I would agree.
So I love Gene Hackman. I think he's very fascinating as a performance, but like again, I just don't think this whole plot. That's why like I was losing interest in the second half. I just don't think it carried me. And also, dude, I'm sorry. In any adaptation so far that I've seen, I do not like Otis Graves, like the bumbling sidekick villain. I've never
Yeah,
liked that character. I don't think he's cool. I don't think he's interesting. I don't think he's comedic enough. It
yeah,
never works for me. It's been in Supergirl, it's been in some other Superman projects. I don't like Otis Graves. I think he's just the worst Superman supporting character,
yeah. Me
in my
neither.
opinion.
Mercy Graves is so much better, and
Literally.
they definitely did her a disservice in Man of Steel, which we will talk about when we get to Man of
Hmm.
Steel, or Batman v Superman in that case. But yeah, I wasn't really rocking with the Lex Luthor plan. I was rocking with the performance. I
Yeah.
think, like, kind of like you said, like he was over the top, but he wasn't like too over the top at time. Like it felt natural in the sense of things. I did miss. I think I kind of like Lex Luthor's portrayal when he's like a big businessman, you know,
Hmm.
in a big ass tower with his name on it, you know, true definition of a narcissist who just wants the world to love him. I like that version of
Yeah.
Lex instead of this like you know, like this very 60s villain, you know, you have a whole base of you have a whole lair because it's a lair under the
Yeah,
train
literally.
tracks, you know what I
It's
mean? And then you
ridiculous.
have, you know, you have your token female like
Eve
sidekick
Tessmacher.
yeah, Eve Tesman, who doesn't
Yeah,
really
yeah.
do anything in the film. And it's like she would have been so interesting as Mercy Graves. Give me more Mercy
Right.
Graves, but I don't think Mercy Graves existed in the comics at this point in time.
No.
Um but it's wild, man. Yeah, I definitely wasn't really rocking with this Lex Luthor or the plan. It definitely for me that last like 30-ish minutes was definitely where I was losing interest, you know,
Yeah,
because I was like,
that
this
was my
plan
big
is so,
holdback.
yeah,
I really, again, performances. Christopher Reeve's on screen. I'm interested. Gene Hackman's on screen. I'm like having fun with it. I
hmm
just was like, okay, I want to go back to the small stuff, like the helicopter scene with him and Lois, or him and Lois in the
exactly.
room, or especially some of the stuff with Krypton and then Mon Pa teens. Like I enjoyed that half a lot more. And so when we got into this back half, again, it's still iconic, but there's a reason I think I don't remember this movie as much as like Batman '89 or stuff, and I think it's this storyline specifically that makes me
Yeah,
forget about it. Or even Superman 2, which we'll talk, and I've also seen bits and pieces of. Like, I remember the stuff with Zod a lot more than I remember the stuff with Luther in this one.
yeah, for sure. If I hadn't have watched this movie like directly before, I would not have
Hmm.
remembered most of this shit. You know what I mean? And it's like
Literally.
it like I could have literally watched an entire movie of just Clark and or Superman and Lois just
Yeah.
doing little mundane tasks and just Superman saving people, which is why I love For All Seasons so much, is because it literally is just that. You know what I mean? It is
Hmm.
just a Superman story, you know, of just him going around saving people. There's no big bad, there's no Brainiac, no Lex Luthor, no General Zod, no, you know, no big, you know, big villain. It is just Superman being Superman and Superman embodying everything that we know him to stand for. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And that was definitely the most interesting part of this movie was just Superman being Superman. You know, that was where
Right.
it truly had me hooked at. And then when, you know, when you bring in this whole, you know, villain plot of Lex Luthor being a generic villain, it does lose me. I still love the movie, and like I said, I still think it's one of the greatest of all time. But it
There you
definitely
go.
does lose you a little bit for
Yeah.
sure.
But it just speaks to those strengths where like it overpowers the
Hmm
faults so heavily. Yeah, I had a great time. I was very happy with this one, and I'm glad I got to
Yeah,
revisit it because I hadn't seen it properly in so long, and I'm excited to watch.
yeah.
I think I'm gonna like Superman 2 more. We'll see, but
hmm
I don't know. I like a lot of stuff with General Zod more, so maybe I'll enjoy the whole package of that more. But there's just moments in this that I'm like, I'll carry with me as like though these Superman moments for on-screen stuff
Yeah.
that I'm hoping we can see matched in this new one because this is a
Oh yeah.
great standard to set,
Oh
initially.
yeah. For sure. For sure. For sure. Which I know we're about to transition into like news and stuff, but I do want
Hmm.
to ask you one more question
Go
before
ahead.
we end everything off on the night. And this is kind of a little bit of a deeper question, but this is still related to Superman. What uh what is your fondest memory with the character?
Ooh, that's a deep one to like pull from.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I've I've loved getting back into stuff with like modern Superman, and there was a point in a couple of years ago where he seemed like they just didn't want to use him at all. Like we got the Shazam thing of his head cut off and the whole
Hmm.
Justice League fiasco, and on TV it was looking kind of bleak too with Arrowverse stuff. But then we've entered this stage the past couple of years where it just feels like they appreciate the character again, and he's been put into TV shows. Now we're getting a movie, and to see that resurgence is like so cool to me because he is such a part of the brand and such a iconic figure of hope that like people kind of forgot about that, and it's cool that we're even like talking about this movie because it's being brought back into the public and brought back into the limelight. So I've been honestly, this modern era is what I've enjoyed the most. I've just loved getting reacquainted with a character that I remember as a kid and I loved as a
Yeah.
kid, but like I didn't appreciate on the level that I do now.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
sure, for sure. It definitely, just like the character of Superman, and I think DC as a whole, but especially Superman and Green Lantern and Batman and Nightwing, those are my
Hmm.
four that truly mean a lot to me. Just
Yeah.
because the reason why I asked you that is because, even for me, there is a story there where, when I was, like I said, when the New 52 was first like launching out, I was in elementary school, and it was a very rough time for me as a kid. Like I said, because I always felt like I was a little different from everybody else. Like
Right.
I would like imagine myself in like little fight scenes
There you go.
or whatever,
Oh.
right? Yeah, yeah, the normal stuff that kids
Yeah.
do, right? But it's like one day I was like really into like the DCAU, and I was watching Justice League Unlimited, and
Yeah.
I asked my mom, could we go into a comic shop, because they had just put one maybe 2 minutes from where we live, from the apartment complex. So she
That's
took me, and
awesome.
I saw Action Comics, not the OG, the New 52 Action Comics, big
Hmm.
omnibus in there. And I picked it up, and like I said, mind you, at this time, like I said, I was still struggling in school with making social wise and making friends. I think I was like 9 or 10 at this point, so I was about to go to middle school, right?
Hmm.
And I was actually 8 years old, and I go and I buy the comic, and I just start reading it, and I start flipping the pages, and I'm just so like drawn in, right? And like it makes me start to feel better about my situation at 8 years old.
Yeah.
So I have this like idea to bring it to school, because there was like this little after school program called ACES, at my elementary school, and I bring it to school, and it was at that moment that people started like, I met all the nerds. Like people started
Hmm.
coming up to me and being like, "What is
Yeah.
that?" And I showed them, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is a Superman book! I didn't know this existed." And I
That's
introduced a
awesome.
lot of my friends to comics, and it was all through all my friends at the time to comics, and it was all through Action Comics, through Superman. So I think that is why, like, for me, it is like that thing too, where it's like I have faith in James Gunn. I hope he gets it right, regardless of how this marketing has been.
Yeah.
I hope he gets it right, and I have faith that he will get it right. But yeah, that's just the reason why I asked you too. It's just because like I know that we talk about these characters, and I know we talk about like these projects and these things that these characters have been in, but you know, we also, I think it is cool to just know like what is like your connection to like the character, or
Yeah.
just this world in general, because it is such a beautiful, vast world, you
I
know?
agree. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful story too. That's
Yeah.
great, man.
Thank you,
Oh
thank you,
my
thank
gosh. We're gonna have a
you.
great summer talking about all these
We
Supermans.
are, we
But I
definitely
mean,
are.
to wrap up Superman 78, I think we get the do we give it the thumbs up exploring DC approval?
We give it five big booms and two thumbs
Five
up.
big booms. There we go.
Five big booms.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we got a couple news stories, as Jalen hinted, so let's get into those real
Mhm.
quick. We talked about it last week. Probably shouldn't have been so hasty with it, but we were like, it's interesting. Garrett
Yeah.
Dillahunt is not playing Green Arrow in the Lantern show. He posted a photo of himself, and it was just a Halloween costume. And so,
That's
pretty outdated
hilarious.
part of the podcast from last week, but it's funny,
Yeah.
so it's fine. Uh, this will tie into the main story, but we found out that Clayface is starting production in October. Obviously, it's supposed to come out next year. That's just a good sign that
Yeah,
I'm glad
exciting.
things are progressing. But the main story, the only real big one we have today, is that Sergeant Rock, a report came out the day of this recording that it's been put on hold, and seemingly they're waiting for to see how Superman goes to kind of move forward with like a smaller project like this because it's such a niche character. But
Mhm.
yeah, they had Luca Guadagnino attached. They talked to Daniel Craig. Then now Colin Farrell was reportedly cast. They also had Mike Feist, who was in Challengers recently in West Side Story and a lot of these other things, and
Mhm.
David Johnson, who was just in the Alien
My
Romulus movie.
boy. Yeah.
My man. So killer cast, killer director, everything was lined up seemingly, and now put on hold. I understand why, like financially, but at the same time, I am a little disappointed to hear this news because I was intrigued with what they were going to do with this thing.
Yeah, I definitely have like mixed emotions about it because on one hand, I was like really excited for this, a Luca Guadagnino led action DC movie starring Mike
Yeah,
Faist
yeah.
and Colin Farrell. I was like, man, this sounds insane, and I was really
Mm-hmm.
interested to see how he did it. But then, you find out that it's put on hold, and I don't know if that's because Zaslav wants to wait to see how Superman does because like I said, like we keep bringing up every week, this marketing campaign has to pick up at some point, bro.
It
We
needs
are
to.
yeah, we are now 2.5 months away and we
Yeah,
haven't gotten that second trailer yet. Yeah, we've gotten the little 2 minute clip or whatever, but I actually think that 2 minute clip worked against them rather than
I
for
agree.
them.
Yeah,
And I think we need something now that truly cements people, because what they need and what Zaslav is worried about, he's not worried about good reviews or any of that. He's worried about putting butts in seats. And I think right now they need to like start putting up some billboards, being on, being in Times
yeah,
Square or something to just get the word out there because they're going up against a Jurassic World movie and they're going up against a Fantastic Four movie.
yeah.
It's right in the middle there.
Right. We've reiterated every
So
week. It's like it's crazy that they're
yeah.
not full in on Superman in the way that they should be, and we expect them to be. And I think that's just a failure of modern movie marketing that things are so underplayed. And I'm curious. I think it'll ramp up a lot in June and July, and hopefully in May too. But like, I don't know. Like, I need people to really be on board. I need to be hearing about Superman a lot for me to be convinced that it's gonna do
Exactly.
really well. So
Exactly. And too, even like playing into this, I also am thinking too, maybe it is partially the money, but maybe it also is just like maybe James Gunn is like maybe we greenlit it a little too quickly, and I'm thinking about
hmm
this release slate, and if we want to release like 2 movies a year, I
yeah,
don't know how this will fit in with our slate, especially if we only want to do this instead of 10 years now, we want to do this for 6,
yeah. They don't want to rush
you
into
know.
it. I get it.
Yeah.
The thing I'm concerned about is that if we're gonna pick this back up, evidently at some point, I don't
Hmm.
see how Luca Guadagnino they keep him around attached, right? Because he's got a lot of stuff in the works, and he's a busy
Yeah,
guy.
he's
He's a big director.
American Psycho. Well, one, he's definitely
Yeah,
doing American Psycho first now. Like that's
yeah.
without question, he's definitely doing that first.
But like, I don't know how you assemble, how you get Luca Guadagnino alone, but then get a killer cast so far of what we've heard, and then
Hmm.
be like, yeah, we're not doing this right now. Like, I don't know,
Yeah,
man. You think since they made all these progress, they would actually go forward with it right now,
yeah.
but
You bring up an interesting point to where now I'm 99% convinced that it was Zaslav. Zaslav probably is looking at this Superman,
mm-hmm.
and also projected, projections. I think projections are starting to roll out soon.
Yeah,
After Thunderbolts is all in theaters and settled in and stuff, projections are going to start rolling out soon. And I don't think right now Superman is looking too hot just because of that promotion
mm-mm.
aspect and just because of what we've got. And that first trailer was such a banger. They should have followed it up like 2 months later with another one, right? But
Yeah,
instead we get a clip that makes people look at this project and they're like, "What are we doing?" You know what I mean? Granted, I really love the clip, and I'm sure you love the clip, and Jackson I know loved the clip, right? But it's like for the people who are not fully convinced with this universe with Creature Commandos, which I know a lot of people are. I'm not fully convinced because, like I said, I wasn't really the biggest fan of Creature Commandos, like you said on our first episode, But it's like looking at this universe, we truly need to, for Sergeant Rock, for Superman, we need to take a look at, or James Gunn should take a look at like what truly we're doing, what is
yeah,
going on with this universe, how do we market each project in a way so where people get excited for it and we can get butts and seats and how to before it's too late and before you start looking at your projections and you're slated to lose money. That would be a shame to have the very first movie your lead out into the universe, where you're
It
introducing all these
would.
superheroes and all these concepts, and it drops the ball, and then we end up in a similar position to the DCU, where the universe starts changing and shifting to where now Superman is
Yeah,
not profitable, and we know that's not true, right? But
that's
that's
not
just the way
true.
the movie business
Right.
works.
It's something where I mean, ever since the DCU was announced, it's felt simultaneously like they have things under control and at the same time have no idea what the fuck they're doing. And
Exactly.
I will see how that translates into the coming weeks and coming months, but I have faith. I'm just optimistic about everything. So I'm like hoping it
Yeah.
all works out DC wise. Like I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
it'll happen at some point. And I'm also used to, random DC movies not happening. Like Sergeant Rock always
Yeah.
reminds me again of the Black Hawk movie that Steven Spielberg was going to direct, which again is even more weird than
Exactly.
a Sergeant Rock movie. So like, if it happens, it happens. I would love to see it just out of curiosity, but I'm not like
Yeah.
it's not like a Green Lantern movie or something where I'm like upset that it's got canceled to like a
Yeah.
crazy degree. I'm like, okay,
If it
it's
was a
unfortunate, but it's Sergeant Rock, right?
Yeah, if it was a Green Lantern movie, I would have broken my phone, broken my
There you go.
laptop, my TV. I would have definitely crashed out
Would have
over
been the
my
crash out.
lanterns.
Yeah. That's all I got for this week. We don't have a set episode for next week. We will be figuring that out. But thank you guys for listening and stay tuned.